What's the worst instance of hypocrisy you've witnessed in your life? Serious. My whole childhood was my dad basically treating my mom like trash and accusing her of cheating. He would call her work and ask her supervisor what the organization's policy was on employees having relationships with customers. And basically just things to make my mom feel like trash. None of my brothers or I ever believed she had cheated on him, as she could barely keep friends because our father tried to control every aspect of her life and let alone how she would have time to cheat on him while raising 4 children that he was barely around for. Fast forward to me at 21. And I catch my dad cheating on my mom and then a year later find out I have 2 other siblings from different mothers that all fit the time frame of my parents' marriage. Luckily he isn't in our life much. My father called me, found out I got divorced, didn't tell him because we were not close and I knew he would side with my ex, and told me he was incredibly disappointed in me because marriage is supposed to be forever. He was calling me to tell he was getting married for the 5th time. Manager complained loudly whenever any pregnant employees needed any accommodation, read, pee breaks, time off for appointments or booked off sick, constantly complained that she didn't understand what the big deal was and that people needed to suck it up and deal. Manager then proceeded to be off the majority of both her pregnancies, booked off and went home almost every day and complained constantly when she was there. My ex-boyfriend's bio dad left when he was 10. He gave up his rights, and then his stepdad eventually adopted him. His stepdad used to talk so much shit about the bio dad, saying that he wasn't a real man for giving up his kids blah blah blah. I found out after we broke up that the stepdad had an older child that he gave up the rights to, but he was still a man somehow. Ex-girlfriend of mine always tells me that the people she hates the most are cheaters. You can probably guess what she did next. My mom is super stringent about anything with chemicals, believe me, I know, I'm a chemist by training. Like, I'll be over barbecuing and she'll cut off almost all the burnt pieces off everything I cook. She thinks a lot of these things will cause cancer to the point that she takes the enjoyment out of everything. It's borderline insanity. But when my dad smokes, it's okay, he's a social smoker so he can stop anytime he likes. ? Friend had sex with, then starting dating my ex, while we were still going out. Years later tells me I'm not a true friend because I hooked up with a girl he called dibs on. Then he doubled down when I brought up my ex saying bro that was so long ago. You ain't my bro, fuck off M8. A high school teacher of mine misspelled the word college as collage on an assignment. And I jokingly said whoever wrote this must not have gone to collage. She made a huge scene in front of the class for 15 or so minutes about how I don't know anything about her. And she brought some friends of mine into it by trying to get them to say that they thought I was full of myself and got pissed when they all got uncomfortable and disagreed. A week later a classmate made the same mistake on her homework. And the teacher made the exact joke that I had made but failed to see the hypocrisy in it. A preacher giving a sermon about compassion and humility who proceeded to scream at the sound guys because she was unhappy with her microphone. My mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and father-in-law all got into an argument with my wife because we wouldn't drop everything and go visit them for Mother's Day, when we had plans. It's a 2-hour visit to them. And they got mad because we said that 2 hours of time and gas was too much and it interfered with what we were doing that day. Apparently us not wanting to make a 2-hour trip is unreasonable. But when they don't want to, they just can't afford it and we should understand. On the same argument, they blatantly said that if we don't have the money to come see them that I should get off my lazy ass and get a job. My wife and I both have jobs. None of the 3 of them do. My sister condemns other women as being whores/sluts often. But if she does some of the behaviors she gets angry at them for, posting provocative selfies, wearing too much makeup, talking to a few different guys at once, etc. Then she's a strong, empowered woman. Hey, Nicole. Make up your mind. My 60-year-old father spread rumors that I was a pedophile because he didn't want people to know he was fucking a 20-year-old for money who was my girlfriend at the time. Slandered me before I could tell his secret. I went on a service mission where we were stationed in a very poor suburb of Chicago. There was a woman in the area who wasn't all there mentally, but still enough to live on her own, do her own shopping, etc. I'll call her Mandy. Mandy loved calling us about every single little thing in her house that she needed fixed. Light bulbs need changing? Call the missionaries. Grave dug for a stray cat. Call the missionaries. Need help harvesting black powder from bootleg fireworks? Yes. Seriously? Call the missionaries. We tried to help as much as we could, but we had a lot of people that we needed to help. It got to the point where she was calling us about 4 to 5 times a day. One day we were over at her place doing some weeding and her cell phone went off. She picked it up, scowled, and rejected the call. Then she said, I hate it when people call me when I'm trying to work. Then she went inside. My partner and I stared at each other in complete disbelief of what we had just witnessed. At one point we were convinced she was messing with us. Nope, just 100% complete lack of self-awareness. She was a nice lady, but man, that was almost too perfect. I had a roommate in college who was also a sex educator and was getting ready to graduate and enter that field. Our last semester of college, she starts saying how her boyfriend has been sick lately and she was really nervous about it. Turns out she gave him herpes, whichever is the kind that is 100 and number 37, for life, and had known she had it since 18 years old. They dated for almost a year and she never said a fucking thing. He starts to get sick, have an outbreak and goes to the doctor, gets all these tests. She still doesn't say anything. Finally she let him find out from the doctor and then she came clean. Who knows how many other partners she never told. The kicker? She mentioned how both her parents had herpes and it wasn't a big deal. She's still a sex educator as far as I can tell from her social media. I never really talked to her again. I still find it so fucked up. At my grandmother's funeral, my aunt threw a fit about my gay cousin being a pallbearer because he's not going to heaven because he's a sinner, and has no right to touch the casket or some bullshit. There was literally a fist fight between two of my aunts that got us kicked out of the cemetery. But the hypocritical part? My holier-than-thou aunt was a former prostitute who also slept with women, who abused her children, did every drug under the sun and was a despicable human being. She just tried to forget about all that for one day, I guess? My cousin is actually a good guy and took care of my grandma, while my aunt once told her she was the devil himself and cut all ties with her. Oh, more hypocrisy from her. She wouldn't put sunscreen on her kids or herself because of chemicals, wouldn't eat McDonald's because chemicals, but got addicted to meth. My mother would always talk about how much her childhood sucked because my grandmother would always favor my aunt over her. My mother would always claim that she intended and then insisted that she would treat all of her children equally because of what she went through. Sounds great, except for she has basically turned into her mother and bends over backwards to help my sister out while my brother and I get the short end of everything. Sister gets knocked up a bunch of times. Of course mom will rearrange her schedule to watch all of her precious grandbabies. Sister doesn't know how to properly spend money and can't pay her bills. Of course mom will lend her the money to stay afloat. Sister doesn't have a place to live because of the money issue. Of course mom will let her and her whole family move into her new house that she worked too hard for and lets them take it over. Meanwhile, when I needed a babysitter for my child while my husband and I worked and were in school, I get a whole lecture about how she really cannot afford to take off of work and could give me like one day, tops, when we were having a hard time paying a few of our bills, because life sucks. She gave me a huge lecture about how I need to be smarter with my money and she is in absolutely no position to help out. I wasn't even looking for help. I was more or less venting to her about it. Edit, JFC. This grew more than I ever could have imagined. Edit 2. I have read all of the replies to this. I really do not know if I should feel comforted or dismayed that this is actually a fairly common dynamic in other families. The only thing I can really take from this, my experience, at least, is just to try to do better than our parents and actively make sure not to do this to any of our children. I do really appreciate all of the kind words and advice given. You all rock. My husband is super critical of his best friend that is alcoholic while he is also an alcoholic. He claims his friend is worse because he lies/hides it. In all fairness, I am a hypocrite too. We always hate most in others what hate about ourselves and won't admit it. I feel like if you are aware of it then there's hope to fix the issue. My husband hates his uncle, who is an aggressively angry man. As far as I know he's not a wife beater or anything, but his words pack enough of a punch to hurt someone deeply. My husband can't stand how awful and vitriolic he is and says he feels sorry for his aunt. I commute with my husband and every single day someone on the road is a fucking idiot or a dickhead because they happened to brake slightly or they didn't realize he was getting over and didn't back off right away. The new guy at work is a fucking no good moron because he made a few mistakes. He stopped calling me names long ago, but last week, 1 week after I got back from dealing with my late father's final business, he commented in front of some family friends about how I hadn't done a certain chore, even though I had spent hours cleaning up the things he didn't do the entire time I was gone. Same thing happened last night, on Father's Day. I privately confronted him and he said, "What? I'm just stating facts. I'm not going to keep quiet about this. If you feel guilty, that's not my problem." The way he looks at people with such disgust, the way he flies off the handle, it's exactly how his uncle acts. But if I say that, he just digs his heels in further and gets even more pissed at me. I don't like that side of the family and I don't like this coming from him. We were doing okay for a while and making progress, but lately he's been regressing and complaining that I'm trying to change him and back him into a corner. So, the only thing he doesn't realize is that the difference between his uncle/aunt and us is that I'm not willing to stay. My husband's parents got divorced when he was 5. His mom remarried almost right away, to her ex-husband's best friend, and said best friend's ex-wife was about 7 months pregnant at the time. So his mom cheated, his stepdad cheated, and stepdad has been a pastor for 30 plus years. If that ain't being a hypocrite, I don't know what is. They are both obviously uber religious, anti-gay, etc. But yet apparently it was okay to cheat. No one has confronted them about it. But my Phil, not stepdad, finally admitted that was what happened. They are pretty shitty people. Brother says all gays are child molesters, and vice versa. The straight brother who molested me. My father hates the idea of welfare. He hates the idea of government handouts. His Facebook is wall-to-wall drug test the welfare queens. And pseudo-libertarian forwards from grandma memes about how the government shouldn't sustain people who couldn't sustain themselves. Dad, I remember being 9 and spending 6 hours in the welfare office with you on a Thursday after you got laid off. I remember you arguing with the staff, to the point where one of the staff threatened to call the cops, because you couldn't claim food stamps for some bureaucratic reason. Dad, when we finally did get access thanks to a super helpful person at the agency, I remember going to the supermarket and filling up 2 big carts of food. I remember Mom crying because she faced the prospect of feeding her kids bread and butter that night and she didn't have to, and I remember you hugging her and telling her we'll get through this. I remember, years later, when we talked about this, you said that we just needed a little help for a few months. Apparently it's okay for you, but not okay for anyone else. Apparently only you needed a little help for a few months, but everyone else on welfare is a parasite welfare queen. Edit, Vass replied to the tell him / post this on his wall next time replies, I have. That's what we had been doing when he said, greater than I remember. Years later, when we talked about this, you said that we just needed a little help for a few months. He doesn't see the hypocrisy. Arguing with my father is like arguing with a brick wall. It's something I've given up on trying to do a long time ago. When my parents got divorced, it was because my dad was having an affair over the span on 4 years. My dad always talked about how we needed to be good spouses, always be truthful, and don't hide shit. People on welfare are lazy. They blow all their food stamp money on beer and cigarettes. They should be cut off. Coming from a girl whose parents have paid her credit card since she was 18 and bought her house and car, she has never had a job and she is about to turn 50. My philosophy teacher in high school actually said that the reason black people straighten their hair and use eyeshadow is because they want to be white. When my classmate asked why so many white people go to tanning booths and try to get tan on the beach, he called her a racist and threw her out of the class. There was a person who would go on for hours about how he thought feminism and equal rights was hedonism and the collapse of our civilization, then later go on to describe the life he wanted, which just so happened to be the textbook definition of the hedonism. I know someone that thinks Trump should cut all government assistance programs. He's on disability. He thinks it's different for him because he's sick and can't work. I was married to a guy who would rail on about abusers and how no man should ever hurt a woman. He'd talk about his mom's various abusers and how he's there in a heartbeat if any woman needs help escaping because he knows how hard it is go get away. How it's not ever a woman's fault for being abused. It's the abuser's choice to be a monster. Yeah, this would be the same guy who raged at me for being stupid enough to find myself an abuser at 17, for letting him hit me, and for letting it go on for several months before getting away safely. Okay then.